There we go. All right. Just briefly starting over because I forgot to hit the record button. This is an official CNCF meeting. Therefore, we're following the CNCF Code of Conduct. Just means be nice to each other, be kind, make it a safe space for everyone who's joining across the world. Yeah, it does seem like we have a lot of attendees from across the globe, which is nice. So Poland, Spain, UK. I'm in Austin. We got Jax from Florida. Nigeria? Wow, cool.
Oh,
you win. Yeah, so this is a weekly meeting. We meet every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have a book club that's in the more European time zone friendly on Thursdays, and they're going through the Edge Computing with Kubernetes book right now. So these are the links to get those books if you'd like. If you haven't already, join the CNCF Slack so you can communicate with us and go to the Kubernetes Book Club channel and post your memes and stuff. So that would be pretty cool. We have a special code for books for a discount off of. Well, I guess it could be e-learning certifications or bundles. I don't think there's any books on there, but Linux Foundation, where you get your certifications, right? For CKA, CKAD, get 20% off. Use Book Club 20. Covers all the Kubernetes bases and more. I like that. It's like a commercial for the Linux Foundation. Biggest news as of late, huge news. Kubernetes is turning 10, everyone. Cue the party noise. So Carlos and crew are having their birthday bash in Raleigh, June 5th. It's right here. Go ahead and RSVP to that if you're local to Raleigh. Doesn't look like anybody is based on the people attending, but that's okay. And then we have one in Austin too, and so that's a link for that. Upcoming KCDs. This may be more pertinent to people tuning in. There's a KCD check, which is in. I forgot to put the dates, of course. Let's see. June 6th. So that's coming up. And then what other ones we got? Barcelona's coming up. Viktor, are you involved with that at all or no?
This is the first time I heard about it, so not yet.
Okay, cool. So June 13th coming up.
I'll need to check it out. June. Okay.
June 13th.
Oh, now I know why I'm not. I will be in London that week.
Okay. And then KCD Italy. So KCD Italy is on June 20th. So make sure to get your tickets. All in the European region. So that's cool. Lots of KCDs going on. Maybe you can catch both of them. That'd be cool. All right, that's all I had for news. Anybody else have anything they want to share with us or want me to jot down in the notes here? Yeah, just put something in the chat if you think of anything, but I'll just leave a section here open for notes. Feel free to add your own notes or whatever you want to do. And then, yeah, I'll pass it over to Viktor. So Viktor, take it away.
Okay. I think
I will stop sharing.
Stop sharing. Exactly.
There we go. Stop sharing.
There we go. Entire screen. There we go. That's my screen. Okay. So now I will be slightly ashamed of myself. I don't exactly remember where we left. So I'm making a wild guess. If anybody was there, please tell me if I went too far or no. But we were in the middle of exploring compositions in Crossplane.
Yes.
And we made the basic one and now goes into making it better, right? And the next iteration is something like this, right? So just as a reminder, composition in Crossplane is a way how to compose different resources that make a meaningful something. In this case, we're building a database. So we are, in case of AWS, by the way, the repo contains instructions for Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. I'm using AWS in today's session. And I don't know, there goes VPC, subnet, some more subnet group routes, and all the things that are required to run a database, right? Now, the interesting thing and new thing, if I find it, Wait, let me see. Did I execute the correct one? Yeah. Where are you? I need to find it. There should be user somewhere. Maybe not. Give me a second. Let's do this. Grep user. Okay, no, wrong composition. Sorry for that. Is it in V2 maybe? Let's say that it is probably. .yaml. Okay, it's hopefully this one. Oh, now I feel ashamed. I forgot why is not user there. Okay, doesn't matter. I'll find a different example of what I'm trying to say. Let's say V2, no, V3, grep user. Where are you? Am I looking at the wrong composition? Echo, hyperscaler, AWS, that's the correct one. Of course. Sorry, in my notes, I was looking at Google, and here I'm using the AWS. Doesn't matter. What does matter, here it is, right? And apart from being able to specify all the different resources, there is something we call matching labels, right? So when you have resources that require data from other resources, and I repeat, this is kind of important and sounds like insignificant, but it's a big difference compared to others. In Crossplane, there are no dependencies. You cannot say this depends on that, right? Oh, you need to do this before you do that. We don't do that, right? But what we do is that you might need to fetch data from something and incorporate it in something else. And in this case, for example, if I would like to create a SQL user, I need to know for which database instance that user is associated with, right? And I could hard code that value and say instance ABC, whatever it is. Or I can say, hey, just find in that same composition the instance, the database, and fetch the data from it, right? So those matching labels are basically how we combine things within the composition, or how do we get data and incorporate it somewhere else. And that's the only that's what we did, if I remember correctly, before. Sorry, where was it? Yeah, by putting a label, which is okay, but not really a great way to do it. A better way is to say, hey, I'm not even going to give you the labels or anything. Just find the instance, the database in this case, inside of that composition. There is no need for me to tell you anything. Just find it inside of that composition, and that's about it, right? If I apply this, kubectl apply -- file name examples hyperscaler compositions SQL v2. There we go, right? It goes there, reconfigures the composition, and creates managed resources, which in my case would be something that I created in advance. And you see all those resources running, being managed by Crossplane, and all those interconnected. Like, for example, in case of AWS, just to give you a similar, different example, AWS YAML, you will see the same type of logic, if I remember correctly, for subnets, for example, where we are saying, hey, subnet needs a VPC, just find it inside of the same composition. That will be the one that you should get data from to know how to generate yourself, right?
Hey, Viktor, quick question.
Yes.
If you
Anything.
have multiple, if there's a conflict, there are two databases, then you will go back to match labels?
Two databases inside of the same composition, or
Yes,
two databases?
Yeah, in the same composition.
Yeah, so you can have, let me try to find an example. If I have one here, you can match controller ref, you can use labels. I'm not sure whether I have an example here, but let
So
me
you
see
use
if
them
I do.
together?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can filter by any way you want, and it can be labels as well. I'm just trying to find out whether I have an example here. I don't, but you could have a label to say, hey, the route table ID selector, whatever it is, don't use it from the same composition, but it also needs to have this label set to A, right? Let's say you have database A and B.
Thank you.
Now that would be an interesting one. I haven't seen that use case yet, but yes, you can filter in many different ways, right? Most of the cases, this the match controller ref works in, at least in my experience, 98% of the cases. There are some rare subnet would be a better example, maybe than a database instance. Like say that you created 3 subnets, but you want this thingy to be associated with one subnet, that thingy with another, and things like that. Okay, now let me delete this claim that I'm running right now. That will eventually delete the database. And I want to show you the patching, right? Patching is something that allows us to propagate information from one place to another. So here's an example. And actually, before I get to patching, this is the definition, right? This is the CRD, custom resource definition, that people will use to interact with, to create, to claim something, right? And what matters here, just as a reminder, that I'm specifying, hey, people, when they want a database, they can specify the ID, they can specify version, they can specify size, right? Those are the properties that I allow at this stage of the development people to use, right? And what we'll see now next is how can I actually include the user-facing information into the resources I'm creating. So I'm going to apply this. Wrong screen. There we go. Applied. So I just changed the CRD of the database, which until now had no parameters. And I'm going to modify my composition. Here's an example, right? And here, for example, I'm saying, let me find a simpler example first, and then I'm going to go to a verse 1. Where are you? Okay, let's go to the top. Patches. No. So first of all, there is something called patch set. That means that in every resource where it is included, here you can see a patch set when I'm saying, hey, include the, in this case, annotations and ID in every single resource that is going to be created from this composition. So whatever somebody specifies as annotation will be included in every single managed resource. And whatever somebody specifies as ID will be included as a name, right? So think of this as a shortcut so that I don't have to repeat those 5 fields. I can just create a patch set, call it metadata, and then say, yes, in this VPC, include whatever is specified in metadata patch set instead of me going crazy over and over again. And then we have something, let me find an example. And please stop me at any moment. I think that the database will be the great example. There we, for example, this is saying, hey, I want to take ID that somebody specified when creating a managed resource, claim, and I want to put it as a name, but since I have multiple route table associations, I want to transform that and say, hey, that will be whatever somebody puts like a name, like Joe, and then dash 1C, right? So I can inject values from the claims as they are, or I can transform them in different ways. In this case, just using a simple string concatenation, or in a better place instance, for example, I'm saying, hey, when somebody specifies size, and let's say if that person does not know what are the sizes, in this case in AWS, whenever somebody specifies that they want small database, that will be translated to DBM5 large in AWS, right? So in other words, you can just inject values from the parent resource down the line, or you can inject that value and transform it somehow. There are many different ways to do it. So if I apply that composition, where is it? Here we go. I should have a new CRD. You already have a new CRD that allows me to specify additional values, and I'm reconfiguring the compositions themselves, right? For, in my case today, for AWS, Azure, and Google. And then I can now, that would be me as a service provider, and now this would be me as a developer. I could define something like this, right? I could say, hey, I want to create a database in AWS, and I'm going to do that by using labels to select which implementation I want, AWS, and I'm going to use some parameters, like I'm going to specify version 13 and small size, right? And you already saw that size is going to be transformed into whatever the sizes are in AWS, right? And then I can just do the apply, right? This is me as a developer now. I want the database. This is the interface created for me. And I can just do kubectl apply. And from there on, the Crossplane will manage all those resources. And you can see the progress. Now, and this is what I mentioned before, that there is no dependency really. Crossplane goes forward towards eventual consistency, right? Like subnets, it cannot create a subnet, it just fails, right? Just as pod would fail if you try to mount a secret that doesn't exist. But eventually, since subnet needs information from VPC, eventually VPC will be created, and then subnet will be able to progress forward, and so on and so forth, right? You will see now, if I refresh, I should have less errors, right? Still errors, but less. Now the VPC was created, the first subnet and second was created as well, and so on and so forth, right? So it eventually becomes consistent. Eventually, all the resources will have all the information they need, and the information comes from some other resources, and eventually all those would be up and running. Any questions so far?
Hey, Victor, not regarding this, but you talked about claim, right? Claim, you said that is namespace specific, and there is one that is cluster, right?
Yes.
Why do we have two? Why don't we just have claim?
Okay, good question. It's the answer lies in historical limitations of Kubernetes. That when we started with Crossplane, Kubernetes really controllers could not deal well with the resources that are both mixed cluster scope and namespace scope. We had problems to make it work. So at that time, and that was a while ago, the decision was made to make everything cluster scoped, right? So managed resources are cluster scoped, composite resources are cluster scoped, and we did not have claims at that time, right? Then the demand for making namespace resource increased, and we introduced claims, which basically are working in a similar way like storage claims, right? Storage is also cluster level, but the claim for storage for persistent volumes is namespace level, right? So you can either create directly composition, which creates managed resources, and both are on a cluster level, or you can create claim, which basically doesn't do much more than create that composition for you. And then it's namespace, the claim itself. There is a SIG group working right now on trying to figure out whether everything can be namespaced. But I'm not sure. I cannot promise when that will happen.
Okay, thank you.
Now, from what I've seen from users, the question about namespace, not cluster scope, very often comes up from the security perspective. Hey, we cannot allow people to manage cluster level resources. But usually after a while, that stops being a problem because most of the people using Crossplane are trying to create some internal services, and then the users of those services would always operate on a level of claim and not really, mostly be oblivious of the existence of managed resources and all those things. And also you can also allow access if you want to read only on a cluster level, right? Any other question? This is fun. I like more questions than Mish talking.
Yeah, one more question is the way these providers get their credential to access cloud resources is through provider config, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But Kubernetes works on like service accounts and all that, right? So are they same? Are they different? Like I have seen some examples where they have used for providers, they used uh, service accounts, not provider config. I think that's how I remember.
So you need to have, at least for Crossplane, you need to have a provider config always. Let me see one example. Where do I have it? The providers here, right? You need to always have a provider like, let's say Azure, doesn't matter, right? It basically points, this is provider config. This is the only thing that Crossplane understands. And in this case, it uses Azure secret to provide credentials to Azure, right? Now, there are some other cases like, which might be what you saw, like this one, which is also a provider, but it is Kubernetes provider, which since I want that provider to write something inside of the same cluster, I'm creating a cluster service account so that it has permissions inside of that cluster.
Yeah, I mean, when we use provider config, we pretty much we are using, in case of AWS, access key, secret access key.
You can use IRSA as well.
There is a document I have shared in the discussion which details all the possible ways, and there is like IRSA and access key also, both.
Okay.
Most of the users, companies that I know, they actually go for IRSA. Very few I've seen that in demos and stuff like that, like what I'm doing. Access keys are more convenient, but usually people use IRSA in case of AWS.
There is the new pod agent also, which is the new
what? Sorry?
The pod agent, also pod identity agent, which is like the enhancement of IRSA, which was announced last year for AWS at least.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? This is fun. No? Yes? Stop me at any moment. Anyway, all those errors that I had before, they're resolved. Eventually, they managed to create all of them, and now it is creating the database instance. I think it takes like 10 minutes in AWS or something like that to create RDS, right? What else?
I have a question. So far, I remember the last session, you mentioned that Crossplane trying to reconcile the two worlds, if we can say, what you asking from the cluster and the provider. It could be AWS or Azure. So my question is, can you at any moment to force that reconciliation, or is something that is executed every 20 minutes or 5 minutes?
Yeah, so
is there a way to change that behavior?
So right now, the reconciliation is a loop, like basically almost all other resources in Kubernetes, that periodically runs. And you can configure what is the frequency of that something, right? Now, there is a feature request that, again, I'm not sure about the exact status of it, that reconciliation will be automatically triggered not only on periodic loops, but also when you modify some of the parent resources. So, for example, if I would now modify the claim, it would not wait for the reconciliation loop, but start working on it right away, right? Or delete or something like that, right? But ignoring that feature, which is in progress, it is just a periodic loop.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Sure.
Victor, previously, when you created virtual machine, right? You executed one composition that created virtual machine. Then you executed another composition that was bigger, correct?
So I didn't, if I remember correctly, let me just show you the file. I think that I executed
VM
this.
something.
Yeah, this, right?
Right.
So this is not a composition. That was before we jumped into composition.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's managed. We call it managed resources, right? Composition is a collection of those.
Yeah. But my question is, you executed this, then you executed another one that is bigger instance type, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a
yes. I
completely
probably changed the
yeah, it was a completely different file, right? But what we noticed is it updated that one instance, right? So I was trying to figure out why didn't it create it? How did it know that I need to update existing instance? You know
okay.
what I'm saying?
So how did it? Okay, so is the question how did it know? So what I executed. Let me first show you. What I executed initially, I had it was AWS. Initially, I had that one, and then I switched to this one, and the only difference was that I changed the size, right?
Yes.
Now, the way how Crossplane tracks the identifier of something somewhere, gets the state of that something, and compares it with the desired state. Now, in most cases, the name that you put, so let's say if I create TKS cluster called Viktor, Viktor is the identifier of that cluster. And Crossplane will go to AWS, check the status of Viktor, compare it with what you want, and make changes if necessary. In some other cases, like in EC2, if I'm not mistaken, you cannot name EC2 instances. VPCs, at least, you cannot put them a name, but AWS auto assigns names. And if I look at get, let's say VPC, VPC. Okay, dash YAML, right? So what Crossplane does when needed, let me just find where it is. There should be external, here it is, right? Crossplane injects into its annotations the annotation external name, which is the identifier of that something, in this case VPC, right?
Okay.
And then it knows what to look for. So it doesn't keep the state similar to other applications that do something with infrastructure. It just really needs to know for the identifier, and then it will go there, ask for the details, compare it, and do all the work. Okay. I'm not sure whether I answered your question.
No,
Let me know if
you did. You did. Thank you.
Now, this is basically, this is actually mildly important. In most cases, this external name will be the same as the name you give to a resource, right? So in this case, the name is, I don't know where the heck is the name. Here, MyDB, right? In most cases, the name and the external name are going to be the same, but in some cases, especially in AWS, not. And in that case, you might want to back this up, right? Because if your cluster goes down, completely destroyed, right? Kind of a meteorite hit the region where you're running. This is the information that you would need. And if you have it, then you can create a new cluster with Crossplane. You can just apply the same manifest. As long as Crossplane knows about the identifier of that something, it will pick it up as if nothing happened.
Okay.
Cool. Any other question? This is fun.
Yeah, it's in continuity, Victor. I would like to know if Crossplane. I don't know if it was discussed before. I would like to know if there is like a plan, like Crossplane plan, to know what changes will be done into the infrastructure. before
The
applying?
short answer is no. In big part because the complexity is much different than other tools, because if you use other tools are mostly client based, so kind of they're one-shot executors of something. Oh, whichever tool you're using, this is what I'm going to do right now. Crossplane is more like Kubernetes based. Things are happening in the future, right? Reconciled later, depending on like the same rules like Kubernetes. So it's much more complex to do it. But the good news is that actually I was on a meeting a few hours ago. We were discussing the plans, how to do it. It will be very different from Terraform plan, which I guess is what you're referring to. Much more advanced, let's say, but it's coming very soon.
And it will also like support templating, or that's also.
Oh, templating, yeah. Oh, templating. So let me find an example. Okay, here we go. This is one of my repos. For example, I'm using. Let me find an example. Where are here? I'm using KCL, for example, language similar to Q or something like that, and I brought all my compositions, everything in KCL. You can basically, so there are two parts for templating. There is a part, and that's coming later in the book, so I won't go into much detail. But basically, there is a part of how you generate the. Let me open the composition actually, just to have a better idea what I'm talking about, right? So there is two parts, right? There is this YAML that basically stops at stops here, which you can generate any way you like. Helm, Go, Python. There are a zillion ways how to generate YAML for Kubernetes, like CDKs, for example, any language you want, right? And then there is the part of this part from resources where you're collecting all the resources that where you're generating the resources. And this generation is happening in a cluster, not on your laptop, right? Not when you execute kubectl something. It's server side. And what we introduced maybe half a year ago or a year ago is functions, right? So you can actually, let me show you an example. You can instruct where are here? Okay, GitHub. Okay, you can tell Crossplane to delegate generation of what is happening in a cluster to a function, and an example is here. Let's say this is me creating a cluster. AKS. No, wrong file. Where are you? Here, compositions YAML. So in this example, this is just this example. I'm not generating resources like what I showed before. I'm just saying, hey, you know what? Execute a function, in this case, KCL. I'm going to give it KCL language information, what to do. And then a pod running in a cluster that runs KCL will accept the input and return to Crossplane some output, basically YAML, right? And I've seen people writing that in Go. I've seen people writing that in Go templating. So basically, you can you can use existing functions or create your own functions. And Crossplane could not care less what those functions are. There are only two things that Crossplane cares about, and that's I'm going to send an input to function to give it the current state of stuff, right? And then I expect function to do whatever you want it to do, and as long as it returns to me the list of resources that I should manage, I'm fine. So basically, any language you want.
Thank you.
Again, I'm old. I forget the question. I'm not sure whether I'm answering
No,
it. Tell me.
Exactly answer the question which I am looking for.
Yeah, and I think that the last or second to last chapter of the book goes through functions, but I, for example, prefer KCL. Choose any language you want. Cool. Anybody else? Yeah, I see. Jack.
This is Jack. Yeah, hi. So maybe if I get the book, I get the answer. But maybe, so I have customers who have combinations of self-hosted plus cloud, like Google Cloud plus Tanzu, or Azure plus OpenShift. Is there any either technical limits of Crossplane, or I say I don't think so. Are there any technical limits or any best practices that would make Crossplane a challenge, or are there challenges or things to be aware of if you're doing a combination of on-site plus cloud?
Sorry. I mean, beyond
you already covered that.
No. I like questions much more than covering anything. So go for it. I mean, again, if I go just through the book, you can do it yourself. This is more fun. So there are challenges with Crossplane itself. You can it can take you 5 minutes or 5 years to learn it, right? I'm going to ignore that. But mixing providers and providers like AWS provider, whatever other provider, that's basically no additional effort. I have, if I go back to the, let me show you an example. Again, going back to the same repo as before. Here we go. That one that I was showing with KCL. No, wrong file. Compositions. Yeah, this is the file. Yeah. So, for example, here I'm generating some AWS or Azure or whatever this is. This is now KCL. Ignore the syntax, right? And then I'm saying, hey, but I need to generate some Kubernetes resources as well, right? So I just jump into to generate different type of resources. And then I think that I'm using external secrets here as well. I'm doing a bit of GitHub. You can combine anything you want, because essentially what composition is, it's a blueprint how to create Kubernetes and manage Kubernetes resources. And whether those Kubernetes resources map to something in the same cluster or in Azure or in AWS or GitHub or whatever you want, does not matter. It combines, creates a composition of resources. That's what it does. Now, the biggest obstacle you might have is that there might not be ready-to-go provider for that something, right? So you might have, I don't know, whatever. Let's say, I don't know, VMware something. And there is no provider that allows you to create, forget about compositions, that allows you to create Kubernetes resources to manage something in VMware, and then you might need to create provider yourself. But as long as that something is accessible through API, it can be defined as Kubernetes resource, no problem at all.
Okay.
And creating provider is relatively straightforward as well.
Okay.
And sorry, last note. And I'm not 100% sure, but I know that Tanzu itself, because you mentioned VMware, right?
I mentioned Tanzu, I mentioned OpenShift,
yeah.
and they each have some notion of cross-cluster management. And so I'm trying to figure out, is Crossplane at odds with the Tanzu cross-cluster management? Do they play nice together? That's sort of where I'm thinking.
Okay, so then I might misunderstood. So you would not have problems to manage those things through Crossplane. Now, whether they are at odds or no, to be honest, I don't use much.
Or best practices, or
yeah, that depends whom you ask, right? If you ask me, I work with Crossplane, I would tell you best practices Crossplane. If you ask Broadcom folks, I'm pretty sure that best practice will be different, right? Yeah. I know that Tanzu includes Crossplane now in some form or another. I'm not sure. Yeah. Don't ask me for details. I don't use Tanzu myself.
That's fine.
But I know that I've seen the demos of Crossplane being part of Tanzu. Basically, on a long shot, and this is my guess, I might not be sure, Tanzu, like others, might be actually looking into replacing Cluster API with Crossplane. Because Cluster API is mostly focused on Kubernetes only, and the scope of Crossplane is much wider, if anything.
That's a good point. Okay, that noted. Okay, good point. Okay.
But conceptually, you can think of managed resources in Crossplane similar to cluster API without compositions.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Now,
can I ask another question? I was just
anything, please. This is so much fun.
Forgive me.
Please do.
So, I would normally set up something with kube and min and make a cluster and run Crossplane in it. Okay, that's what I would normally. But is it okay to do it in kind? Or what would you normally use? Would you normally set up a full-fledged cluster
As a production or
yeah, or would you just use kind for Crossplane?
Kind on your laptop?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm talking about. Is there anything? Okay, let's just go back to. I don't have the book. I should get the book.
No,
Can
don't
I
worry.
do stuff? Can I do stuff in Crossplane with kind just like I can with any other cluster?
Oh yeah. I mean, most of the time I run Crossplane in kind clusters.
Okay.
Now,
answer my question.
I would, just to be clear, I do not recommend in any form of way to run kind as a production kind of permanent solution, right? Because your laptop is shut down and then you lose everything, right?
Yeah.
But to try it out, yes. I know that so there is a number of pretty large companies using Crossplane, and they need many control planes, many Crossplane clusters, and I've seen quite a few of them using. It's not kind, but similar in a way, vCluster, and then they have Kubernetes cluster and then virtual clusters inside with Crossplane, like for one team or another, and things like that.
Oh, should I be using vCluster instead of kind?
Depends. If it's your laptop, use kind.
Okay.
But if it's a real, if it's something that is not your laptop, then you should be using vCluster.
No, and book club calls, people talk about vCluster. I'm like the only one who's not using it. So okay. All right,
vCluster is amazing.
Okay. All right.
Highly recommend it.
I'll research it. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Given once, given twice, 3 times? No? Okay. Here's stop me at any time. Here's another variation of that. And I just okay. Now, one additional thing you can say is where do you want Crossplane to generate secrets, right? And you will need those secrets to access stuff, right? And in this case, I'm saying, you know what? Generate secret in this namespace, Crossplane system, and this is now patching. Let me just find. There we go. And whatever somebody provided as ID when they created the composite resource itself, use that as the name of the secret, right? So if I look at kubectl --namespace Crossplane system get secrets, you will see that as a result, I got MyDB password because it's called MyDB because the name of the database that I gave it is MyDB. In composition, I said that it should be prefixed with password. And I think if I haven't mistaken that's no, actually that's wrong. That's wrong. I did not yet apply this composition. Sorry. The change that I showed you a second ago. Now I'm going to apply it. And now I should have a MyDB without password somewhere. If I find it. There we go, right? I applied the change. I told in composition, hey, use Crossplane system namespace, create a secret called the same as the name of the composite resource. And now I just got MyDB, right? You can see that it's 4 seconds old, right? And that MyDB essentially, if I output YAML, contains the credentials to the database that I just created, right? There is the host, password, endpoint, blah, 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 right? And you can go further. You can customize what the secret is, what the output is. You can even create something completely custom. It's all up to you, right? But the important part is that you will be creating secrets in a more advanced setting, which I'm not having here. Normally, I would push that secret to AWS Secret Manager and then pull it to some other cluster with ESO or something like that. But for now, just having a secret matters, because now I know how to connect to that something that I created a moment ago. What else? What else? Let me think whether I'm missing something. I have a part in the book that comes after that I demonstrate how I can really connect to the database using this secret. I'll skip that part unless you ask me. Just trust me, the database is running and I should be able to connect to it with PG admin. It's PostgreSQL, right? What else? That's about. I'm just checking my notes just to see whether something important is here that I'm missing. No, I think that's the nutshell of compositions, right? Combine the resources any way you like. Inject data from one place to another, whatever you need. And then eventual consistency kicks in, and Crossplane creates all those resources and manages them forever and ever. The important part is that forever and ever, unless I intentionally pause, this RDS will be running until I change my mind, right? Even if it crashes or something like that. Any questions? This is the end of the chapter, and we have like 8 minutes, so probably no point going to the next chapter. So now it's all about your questions.
Yeah, I have a question. It's not related to the chapter. It's something that I've been wondering. Because in this chapter, we have seen how to use the composition to create resource, the composition of two resources, something like that. So I was wondering all the time if all the resources that you manage from that cluster, it could be your laptop, the kind of cluster that you have in your laptop, or even a testing environment. If for whatever reason your cluster is compromised, how can you move your management thing in Crossplane from one cluster to another? Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? So if you're using a cluster to manage a resource in provider like AWS, Azure, or whatever, how can you prevent that something happen that compromises the cluster and you can move all the Crossplane stuff to a kind of recovery plan?
There are multiple answers to that. One is that you can simply apply the same manifests in a different cluster, and Crossplane will kick in. And because Crossplane always goes to some API and says, what is the state of this something, right? And if it already exists, doesn't matter who created it, even if it's a different Crossplane, it will just take over the control of that something. Now, the exception to that is when the name you give to that something is not the same as the name on the other end. And AWS is the most problematic in that aspect, because there are certain resources, not all, but a number of resources like VPCs, you cannot give them a name. You cannot give them identifier. It will be auto-generated. And that's the part where that external, that annotation that I showed with external name, if you would add that afterwards to your manifest, then you can literally do kubectl apply and you're done.
Okay.
Right?
So basically the way to move the stuff is being consistent with the way you name things, no? As long as you don't change anything. So if you create a resource that is my database, in the new cluster, it would be try to identify with the provider.
Yeah. Again, but it depends what that something is. Like my database, if you have a RDS called my database, that's the name of the database, period. It works. You can destroy everything, start over, and it will continue working. Now VPC, you cannot do that because you cannot give a name to a VPC. And in that case, you either need to update your manifest with that external name annotation, or to have a backup of etcd.
Okay.
Right? Because basically all those resources are stored in etcd. Etcd is equivalent to Terraform state.
Okay, because
except that we don't care about the state of anything but the identifier. That's the only thing we really care about.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Viktor, if we are decide to go with Crossplane, right? And when I look at all the composition, this is really busy, from to, it's really a lot, right? So the question is, do you have anything like a starter composition, right? Like module, yeah, you can start with this.
Yeah. So if you go to marketplace.upbound.io,
Okay.
you will find providers like AWS provider. You will find functions like the KCL that I mentioned, and you will find configurations. Configurations are compositions made by somebody else. Like you will find over there my compositions to manage Kubernetes clusters and databases and applications and what's not, right? And you can use it as a starter pack.
Okay.
And that's me, right? And then there are others who publish the same. I know that AWS, for example, has some configurations which are compositions essentially that serve as reference architecture, right?
Okay.
And so on and so forth. So if you go to upbound. Think of upbound.marketplace.io. Sorry, marketplace.upbound.io is equivalent to Docker Hub, right?
Okay.
You have their compositions. Just use them and then modify them to serve, whatever is your specific to you.
Okay. All right.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah, and when you look at this, right, you want to make sure you write your composition in a very modular way, right? You don't want one gigantic composition with everything in it, right? You might want to break them into different parts or something like that.
Yes. Okay.
So,
So
like, is there any best practice? Like, make sure you don't put hundreds of resources in one composition, something like that.
it depends, right? And different companies and teams that use Crossplane will give you different answer. I can give you my personal answer, right? And I see compositions as somebody creating internal service, right? That will be consumed by others, let's say developers in your company or whatever, right? And then it's a question of what is meaningful, right? Like database to me, for example, RDS is not meaningful. RDS with subnets and VPCs and schema and users, that's meaningful, right? So it depends on what has meaning to somebody. Like I've seen people creating compositions that have Kubernetes clusters, right, with whatever is required for a cluster. And I've seen others that say, no. For me, a composition is not only a Kubernetes cluster, but Kubernetes cluster with Istio and with Cilium inside and with Grafana, right? Kind of that's what I consider production ready. It depends what is meaningful product for somebody, right? That's the power of Crossplane. It allows you to fine tune it to be whatever makes sense within context of your organization, right? Yeah. Now that's from the user perspective, right? Because there are two answers there. From the user perspective, you might say, hey, a database with subnets and VPCs and networking and storage and users and schema makes sense, and then you would create that as a composition. But when you're creating that composition, you can see, okay, that will be the user-facing composition, but that composition can invoke other compositions.
Yeah.
So you might say, when I'm building that thing, I'm going to have a composition for networking, and then I'm going to include that one in the database composition.
Okay.
Right? Because at the end, it's all about creating resources, right? And you can say, hey, I can use Crossplane to create subnet, but I can use Crossplane to create a Kubernetes secret. I can use Crossplane to create a composite resource as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And actually, subnets are a good example that if you're working with AWS, everything needs VPC and subnet, but not everything gets a separate VPC and subnet. So very often you will share them, right?
Yeah.
Things like that.
You're almost at the time.
It's up to you. I can stay longer if anybody has any other question, or we can close it. It's up to you guys. And girls, I don't see everybody's faces. Where are the girls today?
We don't have this session.
Shame on you.
There is like a remark from Robert, but it's kind of remark about Terraform and Crossplane and how to manage complicated system that you might also can. If you can develop a little bit, Robert, that's okay. Victor, answer it.
I have a question. In terms all this use case that could be defined using compositions and creating resource. In your experience, what is the best? What has been the common way to trigger the creation of those resources? Using the typical Jenkins jobs, using another tool, or just kubectl?
No, neither. None of those. Most of the cases are that I've seen, and including myself, Argo CD or Flux.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. Good to know.
Because at the end of the day, it's a Kubernetes resource, right? And very often today, we manage Kubernetes resources with one of those two.
Okay, perfect.
But Crossplane doesn't care, just to be clear. Use kubectl, put it in Helm chart, nobody cares, right? I mean, Crossplane doesn't care, but yeah.
It's agnostic about that, yeah, but Argo CD is the common practice, I guess.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. I think that I don't remember. I don't think I ever spoke with a company that is already using Crossplane that is not using it with either Argo CD or Flux. I don't think I've seen that case yet.
Okay, perfect.
Otherwise, that would be like a shell script or something in order to automate the thing.
No, in the current state of Crossplane, that will probably change in the future. Crossplane is Kubernetes heavy, kind of like we assume that you are a Kubernetes user, kind of like not, I want to be a Kubernetes. So if somebody asks me, hey, should I try Crossplane? And I'm not experienced with Kubernetes, my answer is no. Don't do it. Don't do it, right? And so it's usually used by companies who are already spent some time with Kubernetes in production. And most of those use cases usually land on Argo CD or Flux for other stuff, right? And then Crossplane just ends up following that same pattern.
Yeah, I've heard also of Tekton, which is also probably on the same family of these tools, which is also nice if you want to have your CI/CD and in the one tool.
So I tend to separate those tools. Names are confusing, I think. People say, oh, CI or CD. I don't like those names. The way how I like to describe it is that, and this is now not related with Crossplane, just to be clear. We have one-shot actions that are happening once and only once and never again for a given commit. And then we have continuous operations like, hey, I want this thing to be always like that. And pipelines like Jenkins or GitHub Actions or Tekton or Argo workflows, they're very good at one-shot actions. Kind of, oh, you just push something to Git, and I'm going to build a binary and to build a container image, and I'm never going to do it again, never again for that commit, right? That's where those tools shine, right? And then we have continuous operations like, hey, I want this deployment to be always like that in my cluster, no matter what happened. The world might end, but I want that state to be like that. And that's when one-shot operations like with pipelines are not a good candidate. That's when Argo CD or Flux are better because you're making a contract. I'm going to give you this YAML, and you promise that this will be always the actual state of that something, right? What I would normally do is that when I push something, I would use Jenkins or GitHub Actions or use a Tekton. I would build a binary. I would build a container image. I would run tests, whatever I'm doing. And then I would clone the repository with my manifests, update YAML, push it back, and that's where my pipeline stops because then Argo CD takes over and synchronizes it.
Yeah. Any questions, gentlemen?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Victor. I gotta go. See you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
gentlemen, and enjoy your end of the day and the weekend.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.